It's a great season, isn't it? I mean, in a lot of ways, I just love this time as we prepare for Christmas and we put the lights up and you hear the music and we do the shows and the performances. And I got to go to my grandson's first preschool show, and it was awesome. He was a goofball and did nothing right, but it was all great. No, I'm kidding. He was awesome. He was great. He was cute, and that's what he needed to be. But let me be serious with you for a minute, because we have lots of songs about joy and lots of things that tell you should be joyful, and you have Hallmark movies and, stuff like that. And yet this is arguably the hardest time of the year for a big bunch of people. It is hard. So what do? It's Joy Week, man. You better be joyful. So do you fake it? That's not right either, is it? Or are we honest with God? I mean, do we go and we I love this Old Testament. Thanks, Elaine. Beautifully done. I love that Old Testament reading. It's amazing because it's honest. It's just really honest. It's a parched land. And it's like the desert, and it's wilderness. And he says there's feeble hearts and fearful souls and stumbling feet. And we feel attacked on a whole bunch of sides. And yet, throughout the whole reading, it's a reading of joy. So a number of years ago, ISU did a really nice job of the Chronicles of Narnia, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. They did that show. I forget how long ago it was. It was a good show. They did a good job. And it was kind of a musical version. And it caused me to go back and look at the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And it's set, in Narnia in winter. And that's the phrase. Do we have that phrase up there, Ty? Is it in the introduction? It's always winter and never Christmas. For how many in our culture would that be the honest assessment of now, of this season? Now, some of you love winter. I don't like winter. I still don't like it. I don't like bundling up. I don't like it. It'd be 105. I'm fine with 105. Jared, yeah, all you would do is sweat. Anyway. But, as a kid, because winter was not fun for me. New York City is not a great place in the winter, unless you're like downtown, if you're in the city, and there's lights, and there's ice skating, and there's stuff like that. And that's even fabricated. It's fake. As Jim Von Bush would say, remember what Jim used to say? Lies and deception. It's all lies and deception. But you were supposed to be happy, and I'm shoveling snow, and it's windy, and it's bitter, and I got to bundle up, and it's terrible. I didn't like it. But there was Christmas. There was always Christmas. Christmas was coming. And that was the hope. I mean, in our house, little advent calendars, and you're opening up windows, and I'm getting closer day by day, and I could get anticipation, and you could see the tree go up, and then all of a sudden presents started appearing. So it was winter. Yeah, it was winter. It was dark. I didn't like the dark. It was all of that, and cold, and yucky, and lots of extra chores. But there's Christmas. But in Narnia, it's not that way. And for how many of your neighbors, your friends, maybe for you, is it always winter and never Christmas? I mean, just being honest. And I'm actually kind of thrilled. I mean, I lost my one brother suddenly. That sucked. And then my other brother was really, really sick, thought he was giving up on life. He's preaching today. They set up a chair for him. Yeah, thanks. That's nice of you. But they set up a chair, and he's preaching in a little town called Winnie, Texas. Little church, Winnie. I'm pretty jazzed about that. Because if he had gone, this would have been a heck of a Christmas. And a lot of you know this. You get it. You're there, and you've been there. You've seen it. You've been there. There's too many people around us where it's always winter and never Christmas. Boy, do we have an opportunity, don't we? Man, do we have it. Did you know this statistic? 80% of people would come to church on Christmas Eve if you invited them. 80%. Because for a lot of people, it's always winter, and they want Christmas bad. And you know what? People are not so dumb. The Christmas you get delivered in the elevator music is not the real Christmas. Unless it's Handel's Messiah. Always winter and never Christmas. So, how do we be honest? How do we anticipate the joy which God intends? Because God doesn't intend for us to be parched and fearful and hopeless and alone. That is not God's intention. God's intention is joy. God's intention is joy. Arising from, I talked about these candles at the beginning, if you missed it, hope, peace, love is the last one. All those three are things we need. Without them, there's no joy. But with them, there's joy. Joy is what results when we know we're loved, when we know we have a hope. We may not have realized it yet, but we know it's there. And that we're at peace with God. Then joy can happen. You don't have those things, there's not going to be much joy. Or it's going to be this fakey thing. It's going to be this pretend joy, which is worse. Because you feel worse afterwards. So here's what Isaiah says, and Elaine, you did a beautiful job. I want to read some of it again. The desert and the parched land will be glad. That's weird. Desert and parched land will be glad. The wilderness will rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it'll burst into bloom. It will rejoice greatly and shout for joy. You know the story of Israel? When the Jewish people started coming back illegally to the land, like in the beginning of the 20th century, they started trickling back, and it was illegal for them to own land, and they would have to bribe and pay off. And they started purchasing lands, and they'd form kibbutzes, and they would form communities together and begin to love the land. And the Ottoman Empire and much of that had just destroyed the land and salted the earth, and it was just a wasteland. Do you know this story? That in the early 20th century, these Jewish people who knew nothing about farming, because they were never allowed to own land in Europe and in many places, they were just bankers and money lenders and tailors and shopkeepers. They didn't know nothing about farming, nothing. They came back there and they put water on the land and it exploded. They brought land by cups and buckets and canteens and poured it lovingly on each plant that they had did, and it exploded. And they saw this as the fulfillment of prophecy. To be honest, this is pointing to a far greater fulfillment in Jesus Christ. But it also was fulfilled in God's blessing of the land. It burst. It will rejoice greatly and shout for joy. The glory of Lebanon will be given to it. The splendor of Carmel and Sharon. They will see the glory of the Lord, the splendor of our God. Strengthen feeble hands. Steady the knees that give way. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong, do not fear. Your God will come. Chronicles of Narnia, and if you're not, I'm guessing you're familiar with it, but just in case. By the way, it's still posted on our website. We read this chapter by chapter. If you want to go back, especially if you have kids or grandkids, we just read a chapter at a time. I forget how long ago that is. Boy, it's a long time ago. But it's always winter. Lucy and Edmund find their way into this land. It's always winter, never Christmas. The white witch is in control. It's just always frigid, always winter. It's terrible. And so the kids make their way in there. The 4 kids make their way in there. And as they get there, they're befriended by beavers. Not the most heroic of all choices, but it's beavers. And the beavers say, hey, we know that the wolves are coming after us. We got to get out of here because the white witch is going to come after us. It's not going to be good. Your brother has betrayed us. Off we go. So the kids go. And as they go, the wolves are tracing after them, and they believe they hear bells and so forth, and that's the white witch. And they go in and they hide under a hill, and they're terrified. Because they feel isolated and alone and fearful. They just don't know what's going on. And in this Narnia scene, one of the great moments is that Mr. Beaver, in an act of great courage, thinking he's facing wolves, comes out and comes back down and says, come on up. You got to see this. And they come up, and who's there? Father Christmas. And Father Christmas has gifts for them. But he has a far greater gift than the horn or the arrows or the cordial that he gives them or the sword that he gives Peter. Far greater gifts, because this is what he says. Aslan's on the move. God's on the move. And so if you are in that spot where it feels like it's always winter and it's never going to be Christmas, I'm here to tell you God's on the move. God is on his way. And that's why we celebrate this season. It's why we live in Advent, anticipating, preparing. Why the presents and the lights and the tree and all those things are meant to say God is on the move. God is on his way to do his work. And so, point number one, a parched land. Anybody ever feel parched spiritually? I remember being dehydrated. I was in my 20s. I took a buddy fishing, and we just fished from sunup to sundown. And we fished and drank a lot of beer, smoked a lot of cigars. That was probably the real problem. And then I went to bed. And halfway through the night, I don't think I had drunk any water the whole day. And it was probably 90 degrees, northern Idaho, out on the lake all day long. And I was disoriented. I was nauseous. I was dizzy. I didn't know what was going on. I was scared. I was really pretty scared. I had to wake my buddy up. Wham! I said, I don't know what's wrong with me. He said, let me get you a drink. He brought me a big glass of water. And when you're in your 20s, it's almost miraculous. I drank that thing, and I was done. I was good. I drank that water. I was like, whoa. I did not even know I needed that. There's a lot of people walking around parched. A lot of Christians, too. A lot of Christians. And let me tell you, what I love about what I'm telling you about these baptisms, I mean, I wish I could tell you the story behind all 7 of them. All 7 of these adult people who, being nudged by the Holy Spirit, called by the Holy Spirit, who've been prayed for incessantly, many of these people, and answering to that, are now drowning in water, the kind of living water that God is giving. And that baptism is going to be great. There's going to be a lot of water flowing around here. And so what's so amazing for every Christian, we don't even realize this sometimes. We have so much water around us, and we're parched. So much water to drink deeply from. Your baptism, in which God claimed you as his own, called you his child, poured out the forgiveness of sins. You can call upon God at any time and drink deeply and know you're forgiven because you are a child of God. There's a lot of water flowing around here. And so that's no longer a parched land, but a place filled with the living water of Jesus Christ. So if we're parched, it's only because we chose not to drink. Second thing is this. So we have Aslan the lion. When I was thinking of those stories, Aslan the lion and Narnia, it brought to mind, I don't know why, the cowardly lion from Wizard of Oz. And in the Wizard of Oz, you know how he is, courage. That guy, I need courage. And so, but he doesn't have courage, does he? He's scared of his own shadow. He's scared of his own tail, isn't he? Well, and yet we discover he's not cowardly, is he? In fact, he puts himself in harm's way and is damaged, hurt, just unto death to defend Dorothy. A little girl he doesn't know. To be honest, the only reason that the cowardly lion was cowardly was because he was alone. And as soon as he was no longer alone, he got courage. So here's a second joy stealer. Sometimes we're dehydrated. Sometimes we're lonely. And sometimes we're lonely by choice. We choose it. And so the cowardly lion gained his courage because he wasn't alone. He was with Dorothy, and we are never alone. Strengthen the feeble hands. Steady the knees that give way. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong. Don't fear. God's on the move. Your God will come. Jesus' presence brings courage. I remember playing ball. So I played basketball and baseball. Those were my sports in high school. And we were okay. We had a church team that met. This is long before the advent of club sports and all that. But we had a church team. We played in the CYO. And out here, most people don't know what the CYO is, a Catholic youth organization. And in the East Coast, in bigger cities, huge sports organizations, the CYO. And so we were the only Lutheran team in the CYO. It was pretty cool. And we won more than we lost, but we weren't great. But we had one guy on our team who was a heck of an athlete. We graduated from a Lutheran school together in 8th grade. And then he went to public high school. I went to a Lutheran high. But he ended up winning the city championship in tennis and singles and with his twin brother doubles. And he won the state championship on the basketball team. And he was a starting forward on the basketball team for the state championship. That's a big deal in New York City. And so we played in the CYO, and we had lots of games all over the city. Some of the games were in the South Bronx, and some were in Brooklyn, and those were rough areas. They were some tough spots. And we would walk into this room, a bunch of Lutheran kids, and it was a little scary. But it was never scary when Nick was with us. He couldn't make every game because he was so busy with all these other sports. He was that good an athlete. But when he came, we didn't win all the time, but we weren't afraid. And that's the difference. Sometimes we think, well, if Jesus is with me, I'll always win. You are a winner, but you may not always win. You are the one who God has claimed as his own and said, you're with me. But you may not win every game, but you never have to be afraid because you're not alone. Third thing, sources of joy. Because what steals it is parched land, fearful hearts. How about this one? Disabilities. One of the great ironies that I find in the miracle stories in the Gospels, you can find several examples where Jesus heals somebody from some horrible thing. A lifetime of blindness. That's the one that always amazes me the most. The guy who's been blind from birth, and then they quiz him, and they quiz his parents, and they quiz the crowd, and they're all mad because Jesus healed this guy on a Sabbath. And I'm sitting there going, you can't say, he can see, right? They're sitting here going, it's a Saturday, I mean, it's terrible. Or, the guy who's let down through the roof, the paralyzed guy, and Jesus says, I forgive you, and now I heal you. And all they can do is grumble and complain instead of saying, he can walk. Filled with joy. To be filled with joy, there's not a one of us here without a disability. Not a one. A broken spirit, a history we're not proud of, a hurt that we may be living through right now, a loss that we may be experiencing and don't know how to fill. There could be disconnection. There could be isolation. There can be comparison and keeping score. There's not a one of us without disabilities. Remember the parable of the elephant? It's an old from the subcontinent of India where all these blind guys are introduced to an elephant and they say, what is it? And it kind of goes like this. And the first guy goes, hey, the elephant is a pillar. The first guy touched the leg. And then the other one had gotten a hold of the elephant's tail and he said, oh no, this is a rope. And then the other one had touched the trunk and he said, no, this is like the branch of a tree. And then another one held the ear and he said, oh, this is like a big fan. And then somebody else said, it's a huge wall because he had just run into the side of the elephant, into the belly. And then another one, the sixth guy, said it's like a solid pipe when he held the tusk. None of them could see the picture, could they? What they saw was real. They interpreted it wrong. It was real. They interpreted it wrong, but they needed someone who stood outside of it to put it all together. So often, our sight is so limited by our disability. And we focus on that disability. Woe is me. I'm broken. God, don't you care about me? And it's God saying, would you please listen to me for a minute? Let me share with you the whole picture. let me share with you what I see. Because when I see all of you together, redeemed, forgiven, hopeful, encouraged, not alone, gathered as my family, now we have a chance for joy. But parched and alone and fearful, joy is stolen. And so what God sees is the whole picture, not the disability. It's Jesus' touch. It's his sight that heals it all, who sees it all. And when we see as Christ sees, we can see with honesty, but we can also see the joy that is coming because of what he has done and will do for you. And then so we have these three things, right? So what are the things that steal joy but then can be overcome, right? A parched land, Christ's living water transforms that. The desert bursts into bloom, filled with joy. Weak and fearful, courageous, but I'm not alone. I've got someone with me who is my courage. And then the third one is disabilities. Yeah, but Christ overcomes those. He sees all of those things and takes my limited vision and makes it his own. But then the last thing is this, and this one is when I read this text, I went, this troubles me just a little bit because this is hard, because look at what it says. And a highway will be there. It will be called the way of holiness. The unclean will not journey on it. It will be for those who walk in that way. Now, I suppose religious people could say, well, thank God all those yucky people won't be able to walk on that road with me. But that's not how my heart hears that. Am I going to be allowed on that road? Did you hear the words? Do you see them? The unclean won't journey on it. You know, Jesus never intends for us to be parched. Jesus never intends for us to be hopeless or alone. He is longing to be our righteousness. You know, in that Narnia show, I remember this. I was talking about it in Bible class. It was a musical, and I'm sure that C.S. Lewis was turning in his grave every time they sang this song. Because Edmund is the little boy who's the traitor of the four children. And he has to be redeemed. And the redemption calls for the life of Aslan the lion. He gives his own life for that traitorous child. And you know what the song talks about, how Edmund's going to get right and be made right? The song's titled From the Inside Out. And I remember almost walking out of the show. Because no one gets right from the inside out. No one. It was because of what Aslan did for him. What was done on his behalf. So here's my good news to y'all for joy. If you think this sermon is about, you better get your act together so you can have some joy this season. It's ready for God to be on the move so he can pour his water into us, so he can change the parched land into a bursting, that he can come and stand with us, and we're never alone, never isolated, that we are always with him, that he is someone who walks the road on our behalf with us. He says, that one's with me. He's coming with me on the way of holiness, which leads, my friends, to the path of joy. Because there is no greater joy that God has than when he sees you walking hand in hand with him, relying, loving, joyful at being in his presence. That is our source of joy. To God be the glory. Amen.